So what I want to do in this video is cover a 4-stage progression that you can use to build up from not being able to do a single leg deadlift at all without risking falling flat on the ground to being able to execute them with a barbell. Now the rate at which you're going to be able to progress on this is going to change from person to person. Some people are going to blaze through the first 2 stages and then kind of get stuck on the 3rd stage of progression, whereas other people are just going to move at a pretty moderate snail's pace all the way through to the end and become proficient with a barbell. Other people are going to get stuck on stage 1 for a long time. Everybody's different and everyone responds differently, and we all have different strengths and weaknesses, but using this 4-stage progression tends to become a very efficient way to move right through to the barbell. Now, first on the list, I like to use the suspension straps. And the reason why is because they allow you to practice the movement with assistance. So, what I do is I grab onto the suspension strap handles. The next thing I do is I make sure that any slack that was present in them is pulled right out, getting a nice firm grip. And what I'm going to do, I personally prefer to make sure that the stability is held in the opposite hand from the leg that will remain planted. This is just a preference. Everybody's different. Some people like to keep it on the same side. I like to be opposite. I find that my balance is a little better when I do it that way, and the amount of stress applied to the posterior chain, the glutes, hamstrings, and lower back is still present to a high degree. So, in this particular situation, I've grabbed the suspension straps with my right hand. I'm going to keep my left foot planted, and I'm going to use this kind of like a counterbalance. So the idea when executing this single leg stiff leg deadlift is we want to keep as straight of a line from the back of the head through to the heel of the leg that's going up. So it's almost like, it is a hinge, but it's almost like trying to keep a straight line as you go down. A lot of people make the mistake and they break at the hips and then they lift their leg. This doesn't really cut it. You're kind of cheating the exercise, and you won't benefit from doing it that way. Even though you might start in the same position and end in the same position, it's a process from getting from point A to B properly that's going to give you the progressive yield. So we've got the slack pulled out of the suspension straps. Left foot is planted, keeping that tension on the straps the whole way down, so you're almost pulling your palm down towards your body to keep that tension tight. What you're going to do is simultaneously lower your torso and your head while raising your right heel up to the ceiling behind you. Ideally, you're going to aim to stop when your torso is just about parallel with the floor. That left leg will have a slight bend in it, but no further movement will occur from anywhere else other than the hips. Hence the name stiff leg. The leg could be bent slightly, but no movement comes from it. So, slack is removed from the suspension straps very slowly. I'm going to control the movement down. You can see I'm still keeping the slack out of the suspension straps, and right at about parallel, I'm going to control back up. And as I control up, I'm aiming to keep a relatively straight line through from the back of the head to the heel as well. Moving slowly, deliberately, really focusing on feeling this hamstring through that left leg. So the goal is not to rush through these. The goal is to execute this with control. You also notice you get a little bit of core work in on these as well. This will really light up that posterior chain. Now, how do you know when to progress on from this? The first thing you'll notice is you likely have one side that's much stronger and one side that's much weaker. Personally, I believe once you can execute these in about the 12 to 15 rep range on one leg in a row, meaning 12 to 15 reps consecutively, then switching over to the other side and repeat, for 3 to 5 sets across, with fair rest in between each set, of course. then you're ready to move on to the next stage. Now, the reason this is valuable to aim for this higher rep range, even though your aim might not be to do high reps with this once you transition to a barbell, is because when you move to stage 2, it will automatically become more difficult, more intense. Therefore, even doing less repetitions will keep you under tension for about the same period of time as you might be executing these with quality form in the 12 to 15 rep range. By practicing these until you master them, and you can do 12 to 15 reps at a time for multiple sets, you'll be much more confident coming into stage 2, which will allow you to excel to a much higher degree and blaze through this stage as well. Now, stage 2 gets interesting. We're not adding any load yet, but what we are doing is removing the assistance of the suspension straps. Now, this happens to be deceptively difficult to people, which is why I suggested becoming almost too proficient at those before moving on to this stage, because removing that assistance for the balance is really one of the hardest transitions for most people, right? Having something to hold on to and balance with really makes the movement a lot easier. And when you remove that, it's a pretty significant jump in relative intensity. But once you've mastered this stage, it becomes a pretty smooth flow through to stage 3 and 4 as we introduce load. So, let's give it a shot. The aim is very much similar, right? What we want to do is ensure that we have our 1 foot planted, the one that we're trying to apply stress to the hamstring, glutes, and lower back of. The other thing we want to do is ensure that as we hinge at the hips, that we're aiming to keep that straight line through from the back of the head to the heel. That's what's going to ensure that adequate stress is applied to the posterior chain on that planted leg. And it's also going to ensure better positioning to lengthen the hamstrings of that planted leg. Again, just to reiterate, this is not what we're looking for. We see a lot of that happen when people are trying to do single leg work, because we fall into the trap of thinking as long as we kind of end in what looks to be the correct position and then we return to what looks to be the correct starting position, then we've executed the rep right. And that's not the case. What we're really paying attention to is the process of getting from the start to the finish point and making sure the entire range of motion, the process, is adequate. And that's where the benefit actually comes from. So understanding that, we've got the left leg planted. Now the difference here is there's no suspension strap to hold on to. There's no balance. So it's all on you. Now, everyone has preferences. Some people like to reach out. That helps with their balance. That's allowed. As long as we're keeping that straight line through from the back of our head to our heel, that's the most valuable part. And this leg that's planted, it's a stiff leg deadlift, so it's not bending up and down at the knee. It's staying static from the starting position. It can have a slight bend to initiate, but we're not squatting, we're hinging at the hips. So if you want to reach out in front of you with one arm, both arms, you're more than welcome to do that. If you want to reach out to the sides, I've seen people do that. I personally don't benefit from that hand positioning. And some people like to keep their arms at their chest. You got to find out what works for you to begin with. So I personally am going to reach with one arm being the opposite arm. So my left foot is planted, slight bend, and very slowly I'm going to hinge at the hips, reaching that heel out behind me and providing a little bit of counterbalance with that right hand. Once I reach that full extended position from the heel to the back of the head, keeping a straight line, and my torso is just about parallel with the floor, I'm going to stand back up, trying to maintain that straight line. And as soon as this foot comes into contact with the floor, I'm going to immediately begin the second repetition. As you can see, I'm moving slowly, I'm moving deliberately, I'm trying to keep my form the best that I possibly can. I'm not rushing through just to get them done. I'm executing them with quality form to ensure that I'm actually getting stronger and benefiting from each repetition. You'll notice a bit of a trend here because I believe before you move on from these, same idea. You want to be able to execute 12 to 15 reps consecutively on each leg for multiple sets, 3 to 5 sets. That's some pretty substantial volume on the glutes and hamstrings for sure before moving on. to stage 3.